there is really no universal musical language. Music is a universal language, but there's so many dialects to that.
Hello and welcome to Deconstructing Worship, a series of positive and constructive conversations about the current culture of modern worship.
We are your hosts, Kyle Treble
and Steve Quantic. Okay, hello everyone. Welcome to this week's episode of Deconstructing Worship. Very, very pleased to be welcoming my very dear friend, Cherith Johnston, to the podcast today. I know Cherith because she was studying in Cardiff and we were on the worship team together at the church that I go to in Cardiff. But aside from that, Cherith, would you like to say a little bit about yourself?
Okay. Hi, my name is Cherith. I am 25 and I'm from Northern Ireland. I'm training to be a music therapist. Hopefully in the next few months I will be a proper music therapist. So I was studying in the University of South Wales and then COVID hit and I'm now back in Northern Ireland learning remotely and doing placement remotely. And more recently I am doing worship like literally from Friday. I've been doing worship coordinating in Church of Ireland church plant here in Northern Ireland.
I was like, what got you into the idea of music therapy? Because I find it so interesting. And actually, it's been a lot of my random conversations with random people lately. So what kind of drawn you into that?
Yeah, so I love music and I love people and I love helping people. And when I was doing my GCSEs and A-levels, I was like, oh, what kind of thing should I go into? I don't know. And my auntie, who is a paediatric doctor, she suggested music therapy to me, so I researched it and was like, oh, yeah, this sounds class. This sounds like it's me. Yeah, great. And then I decided to do a music degree in Queen's here in Belfast, and at the time we had an African missionary from Burkina Faso staying at our house and Barima, so he is a church planter, and I was telling him about music therapy because he asked, because you're basically working with all age groups using music clinically just to help, mental health, pain relief, like memory loss, all that, like just a myriad of different things.
Okay.
And he was like, oh, that sounds like when in the Bible, whenever David plays for Saul when he has the evil spirit on him. So I looked it up and I was like, oh yeah, it is. And then as I kind of journeyed through my music degree, and then I went and did traveling, I was like, yeah, music therapy's for me. So then I applied and I got in.
That's really cool. That's really cool. It made me straight away think about worship, because in a way, there must be a reason why musical worship, because obviously you can worship God in a myriad of different ways. But music, obviously for the three of us, we're all musicians and musical worship is our thing. But it's so powerful, isn't it? And I think of it from a sense of musical therapy and what it actually does, kind of physiology. How's that word? Say that word for me.
Physiologically.
Physiologically. That's the word. Let's just leave that in. People need to know I can't speak properly. It's so cool. How far into your degree are you?
I'm at the end, so I literally have about 3 or 4 months left, and then that's me done. So
okay, has it kind of opened your eyes a little bit more into kind of the importance of musical worship then?
Oh yeah. So basically, music's the only thing that fires up your whole entire brain. Your whole brain is used when you use music, which is why music therapy is so good at helping people with memory loss, for example. Although you have to do an extra course to do it. So, but it, just understanding how corporate worship can bring people together, bring the community together, how music can help you focus on, Jesus. And I definitely think God has definitely specifically placed music the center of worship. Even the Bible with the Levites and David, for a specific reason, and it is because it takes your whole being to do it. Whether you are a musical person or not, you can still engage with music.
What that makes me think of is, because on this podcast we like kind of unpicking a lot of the worship phrases and buzzwords, like a lot of kind of Christians, because I think it's out of like a fear of emotionalism, it's like a fear of like a superstition about people's emotions being manipulated. But a lot of people like to say, worship isn't just music, it's a lifestyle. And it is, it absolutely is. But I think from what you're saying, it sounds like that it doesn't do us any favors to downplay the importance of music, because I legitimately didn't know that. I didn't know it's the only kind of thing that makes your whole brain light up. And that's got to mean something, right?
That's fascinating.
Yeah. Like, definitely. I just remember when we were doing it, like, literally we had a lecture on it in second year, and I was like, yes, and now it all makes sense why we use music in worship. And, like, I'm doing a secular master's. Like, my lecturers aren't Christians, but I was just like, yeah, this is just so obvious to me why we do this. I don't really know if it's very theological, but, like, I think whenever your body, soul, and mind are intertwined, and music kind of gets at all parts of who you are, it's important to not downplay the musical aspect of worship. But I do think that it is something that you need to take with you your whole life in every situation you're in. But I think music kind of grounds us, like on a Sunday, for example. If you do church on a Sunday, I know some people don't, but if you do church whatever day of the week, you're grounding yourself to be able to go out into the rest of the week.
That's so cool. It's so, like, I like just what you were talking about then, Steve, about like that kind of superstition behind emotionalism and all that sort of stuff. And like, we can all do it, can't we? Like, like, we always want to make sure that we're being theologically sound and making sure that we're not being manipulated. It's like God didn't make a mistake when he put these things in us. Do you know what I mean? Like, he made us, like you like Steve said the other day, he was like we're emotional beings. Obviously, we can always take something that God made for good, and we can always kind of maybe like mishandle it and misuse it. Of course we can, like food or anything. Like, I like a nice glass of wine, but maybe 50's not a great idea. So we're emotional beings, and like I love it's so cool, like, talking to someone who really, really knows the importance of music, and is also like involved. Obviously, you lead worship. I got a question. How have you found that have you like led differently since learning this stuff?
Oh yeah, 100%. Like I don't do as much spontaneous worship now, but when I was doing spontaneous worship maybe a year or two ago, like the whole way I would do it was completely different. Like, I was more informed, I was more, I was able to read the room better. I was able to maybe pick up on like different emotions or tensions in the room, or counter transferences with other people. So yeah, like I think doing a therapeutic degree or master's or whatever, it changes your whole being, really. But I think it's completely changed the way I lead worship, and I do a lot less talking and a lot more letting the music sort of speak, and letting people kind of think for themselves, feel for themselves, because we have to feel. If we like bottle it up, it all comes out anyway. So yeah.
So do you mean like in terms of by letting the music speak, do you mean like making more space for like instrumental sections, or?
Yeah, making more space for like people just to be them, whether that's in the silence or in the instrumental or in the singing, being like just letting people be with themselves and with God. in a corporate setting. It's quite hard because in a corporate setting you've got so many people, but just letting people be themselves, because I think that's what God kind of wants from us, is our true worship, and I think that's the way to do that.
So cool. Honestly, I'm like speaking to you now, and I'm like getting like super pumped up, like, because like we've spoken about like loads of times. I mean, like on the podcast and like in general, like day to day life, but like that longing for people just to like just be allowed to be themselves. That's so cool. Like just hearing you say that of like and like correct me if I'm kind of like paraphrasing wrong, but like what I'm getting from that is like music is its like kind of most powerful when you just let it be, instead of kind of like trying to take it somewhere or things like that. That's amazing.
Yeah, and I think like part of maybe letting the Spirit lead you as well is also listening to what's happening in the room and how people are responding and taking people with you. Because like so many times as worship leaders, we can just be like, oh, this is where I am, and I'm going to take the congregation to where I am, but the congregation aren't there yet. So you need to be like, okay, you take it back. Where are they? How can I bring them along with me? And how can I bring them to like a place where they can enter into the presence of God, although they're already in the presence of God because God's everywhere.
Yeah.
So, but maybe instead of the presence of God, like a realization of the presence of God might be a better way of putting it. I don't know.
Yeah, it kind of feels like this should be knowledge that, well, not just all worship musicians, but all Christians are armed with, right?
Yeah.
Because I'm really sorry, Carl, I'm going to talk about preaching again.
Steve's never talked about preaching on the podcast before.
Here it comes. Here it comes again. The moment where people think, because the thing is, like, if people who know me know I'm a wordsmith. I spent 7 years pursuing a career as a scriptwriter. I love words and well-crafted words, but barely an episode goes past where I don't go in on preaching. But then it just makes me think, does hearing a presentation, does that engage the whole brain in the same way? I mean, it can still be transformative, of course, but, we kind of talked about, way back in episode 1, Cherith, like we talked about, that you don't get the preacher getting nudged on the elbow and asked to cut their bit short.
No, yeah, you don't. Although my dad's a pastor, and there was one time where he was just like, I'm just not going to preach today because clearly God's doing something with the worship. And then that's all he said the whole service. But then
that's cool.
I come from a musical family, so
that's really cool. That's really great though, because like I think like you said, Steve, like words and preachers and sermons, whatever you want to call it, like they can be really transformative. Like they really can. I know I've been impacted so many times by like someone just bringing that like truth. But like I feel like on the whole, and I am like generalizing, it's not everywhere, it's not everyone, but like the importance sometimes is like really placed so heavily on the preach as opposed to the worship. And it's almost as if like just hearing you talk about like how we react naturally to music and things like that, like and I'm not just asking the question, like should it be the other way around, like with your dad? Do you know what I mean? Like he saw the importance today is the worship. Great. So maybe the answer is like we just need to be led by the Spirit and allow ourselves to be led by the Spirit. Because there's been sometimes, you've been in like worship services where, and we've talked about this before, where like, the worship leader's like, I'm going to keep going. And like, people are like, could you stop now? Like,
yeah.
Like, do you know what I mean? So it does go both ways. That's really cool.
I feel like there needs to be like mutual communication on both sides, discussions and maybe more education on both sides of maybe what words do and maybe what music and worship does. I think.
Yeah, because I've definitely, like you say, I think it's that kind of mutual connection and communication and trust is so important, because I've literally been playing in worship settings where the person leading the meeting has not used exactly these words, but as good as just told the worship team to shut up. Just stop playing. I've got important things to say now. And it's like, yeah, but we're we're all doing a thing together here. It's not you versus us.
Yeah. And even that, the congregation needs to be brought into that as well. Because sometimes, like, the leadership and, like, the worship team and all, we're all, like, in our little bubble. And then, we all hate the word bubble now, don't we? But then we forget about the congregation sometimes. And they need to be let in on the secrets too. Because they're not secrets.
Okay, so question 1. What is your kind of earliest memory of congregational worship?
Okay, so my dad and my grandfather both pastored the same church for about 10 years. And so I used to sit with my grandmother in church because my mum was playing the piano every week because it's quite a small congregation. But like this church really loved worship, loved to, glorify God. Like they were very charismatic in their worship. But I remember being about 3 or 4, and it's just like a memory that lasts with me, coming into church with my grandmother and being handed a hymn book and then sitting beside her and my grandmother opening like to the right hymn, even though I couldn't read. Like it's just open to the right hymn and I would sing it, but like I'd be singing the wrong words because I was 3. But yeah, I think I remember it because it literally happened every single week. Like this was the thing that happened. And yeah, it was just, I don't really know why we had hymn books either, because we like would sing one hymn from the hymn book and then it would be all like Hillsongs and 90s stuff.
That's really random.
I still have no idea why that was. It's probably something, I don't know, just to like make the old people okay with singing Hillsong stuff, probably.
I kind of like it to be like, I kind of like it. It's kind of, it's keeping the old and bringing in the new at the same time instead of kind of brushing off one as if like one is more important than the other. Like I think that's cool. That's really cool. What baffles me, you're like the second person to like remember being like 3. How? Like I barely remember yesterday.
I mean, I barely remember yesterday, but I remember that one memory from being 3. But as I say, it's because it literally was every single week like this would happen.
I love that so much, though. I love that, like, I don't know if this was kind of like her intent, but obviously she's like trying to include you.
Yeah.
Like you say, it's like a really nice way of like marrying the old and the new, because for a lot of people, I'd imagine, like, being told to turn to a certain number in the hymn book would have been their comfort zone in terms of musical worship, right?
Yeah, I mean, most of the churches that we were in, like, even until I was about 21, would all still have the hymn book somewhere, just in case.
So after that kind of initial experience, Cherith, what was then your experience? How did your journey progress into getting involved in musical worship?
So when I was 10, we moved to a church in East Belfast, in like a really urban area. If you've ever heard of Van Morrison, the church was like parallel to the house he was born in. Like,
okay.
The worship leader that was in that church stepped down. He got this amazing job in another church and did amazingly well out of it. And my mum then built the worship team up from scratch again.
Wow. Because
at the same time as him leaving, a lot of the other worship leaders were having babies and, couldn't commit. So she built it up. I played the flute the whole time. Just being an Irish stereotype right there. And there was a few guys who learnt guitar to be on worship team that could sing. There was a few people from England who emigrated over to Northern Ireland, came to the church, started playing in the team. A few people learnt piano. So it was at a time when people in the church were learning instruments and wanting to get involved. We still had an organist. She was amazing. She was partially sighted as well, but the most incredible musician because everything was done by ear.
Wow.
And most incredible singer as well. So that's where I started to get involved in worship teams, in understanding what worship is. I remember my dad would do like these worship night, he would do nights with the worship team where like we'd all sit in a circle. What's worship gonna look like in this church? What are we going to sing? What's our, what is our motto? How are we going to train up other people to come in and do the same thing? So it was all about like, not leaving anyone behind, just keeping everybody in the loop and just, like, making sure the team was never like a sort of clique that nobody could join. And I remember my mum would like listen in on the congregation and be like, "Oh, he can sing. Oh, do you want to be in the worship team?"
Nice. Scouting
like,
the congregation.
Things like that.
So then from there, when did you start actually, leading worship?
So this has been a journey. After that church, when I was 17, we moved to another church, and when I was 17 was probably around the time I really felt like I had been gifted in this area of leading people and leading worship. But the church we were in was quite difficult. It was quite it was in the countryside, so me coming in from the city, I think, was a bit jarring for some of them. But really lovely, genuine people, just quite
set in their ways.
Yes,
who's this city girl coming into my town? Yeah. I mean, I'm doing that accent because I'm from Devon and that's the only accent I can do. But
that's not Kyle attempting an Irish accent.
No, I can only do the farmerland from Exeter.
We have not had any, as far as I know, at the time of recording, we have not had any hate messages. I just need to make it super clear that was not.
That was a Devonshire accent.
That's amazing. So you were in this church with these people who were quite set in the way that they liked things.
Yes.
So what kind of what was your journey there? What was did you get much kind of pushback, or was it just like a lack of understanding? Were they kind of for you but just didn't get where you were coming from?
I've been really thinking about this, and I don't actually know, to be honest. I think sometimes it was a bit of pushback because I played flute, so I just kind of went into the worship team playing the flute. But they knew that I could sing. They knew that, I wanted to learn how to lead worship. It was never that I wanted to be like, oh, I can do it better than you, because I did not think that at all. I just wanted someone to show me how to do it. And in the youth group, the guy who was in charge of worship would be like, oh yeah, you're really gifted and you're so good at like music and leading people, and you'll be a really good worship leader, and we'll have you on the team. But never was I on the worship team. It was like, oh, okay. So
that's so weird. So paying lip service to the idea of you being a worship team, but actually just never acting on it.
Literally never acting on it ever. And I still to this day have no idea why. So then my aunt and uncle had been going to this church before my dad became pastor there. And my uncle is still one of their worship leaders. So he kind of took me under his wing and like sort of showed me how to do it. But I never really led worship there. I did twice. That was it. And then we left because my dad got a new job. And I was like sort of sitting in the wings waiting to lead worship. And then I did this mad year of travel with Elim Missions, looking into worship in different cultural contexts. Led some worship there, and all the missionaries were like, pretty happy with what I did. And then I went on a Elim Sound worship leading training course, but the international missions director at the time was like, he had put me on it just as part of my year with them, and I learned basically most of what I know about worship from that.
Cool. So, would you like to just tell us a little bit about some of your experiences with Elim Mission? So what did you what was your experience of different cultural worship contexts?
Oh, okay. Yeah. So I basically brought a song out to different countries. So I went to Cambodia, India, Kenya, and the Philippines, over a 9-month period, with like a 2-month break in between. So basically what I was meant to do was go and record this song in different cultural contexts, but I went really into the cultural context, and the song just did not work when you put it together. So I have like Kenyan version, Cambodian version, Indian version, but it was basically, even though like it really failed, I learned so much just from using that song that I wrote, just about different cultural contexts and worship and get different cultural sounds. And that's when I started unpicking the idea of like Western music and colonialism and Westernization and worship in these different cultural contexts. So like in India, it was just so Indian. They were very like using Indian scales, Indian tunes, and like they used their own languages, just really grasping onto their identity as Indian as well as Christian. So they were writing their own songs, using their own instruments. And I loved it because I was like, yeah, they know their identity. They like, this is great. In Cambodia, what had happened was they had Western songs, and they translated them into Khmer, but one English word is 5 Khmer words, which I didn't know until I went and talked to the Khmer pastor of the church. So then I was like, oh, but what about using Khmer folk songs and changing the lyrics to something more about God, that sort of thing. And, there had been some of that, but I just was like, oh, you could do it more. Because in Cambodia, they had their own pop music as well, so they weren't really listening to Western music anyway. So because as musicians, you have like musical languages. Musical languages are different wherever you go. Even, for example, in the UK, like the Welsh musical language is going to be different to the English, but then English is going to be different north and south, and then Scottish is going to be different, and Irish is going to be different, So it was like, so I would go into a place and be like, what is the sound in this context? In Kenya, they were using a lot of more Western music, but meshed in with their own Luo or Kiswahili music, which was quite cool just to see the difference of how people engaged with both types of music. And to be honest, there it was equal for both, because they would do the same dances that they did with the Kiswahili and the Luo with the English songs. But in Kenya, they all speak English, Kiswahili, and then their tribal language. So made sense to do that. And then in the Philippines, it was very Filipino. And Filipino culture is slightly westernized, but I wouldn't say completely. But they would sing a lot of Planet Shakers if they were singing any sort of Western music, which it was nice that they knew where their identity was in the Western worship scene. Yeah, learned a lot.
Wow. If you're going to have, like, I know you probably got like 1,000 takeaways, but is there anything that like really kind of impressed on you from those trips?
Yeah, that there is really no universal musical language. Music is a universal language, but there's so many dialects to that. And also, if we in the West are like, oh, this is how you do worship, well, Jesus didn't worship like us. The disciples didn't worship like us. Like, even 150 years ago, they didn't worship like us. So, like, who are we to say we're right?
It's just like realizing that it's just, you know, this is how we're currently worshiping, and like that's amazing and awesome. But it's, you know, it's one of a billion infinite ways to worship, and I think that's really cool. That's awesome. Do you know what I mean? Like, we probably won't be doing this kind of current trend of CCM that we're hearing now in another, I don't know, 50 years. It'll probably sound completely different.
Yeah, might even be a year with the way things are going with like how fast things are moving with COVID. Like, everyone's in their rooms being like, oh, what are the new sounds I can make?
100%. That's really cool. That's really, really cool. Cool. So, like, taking all that into account, all of these kind of amazing broad experiences you've had, what would you say your favorite thing is about worship?
That anyone can engage with it, whether you're a musician or not, whether you are a Christian or not. Like, it's something that everyone can engage in. But I do sometimes think we kind of, I liked the analogy you said in a few episodes ago, where it's like vanilla. We kind of like vanilla it and make it, you know, so it appeals to everybody and nobody.
Everybody and nobody. Perfect.
So I just kind of think, you know, we've had this time to reflect. So what's going to be the new sound? Like, how are we going to do that? Is it going to be the same for everyone, or is it going to be like the musical dialects? And I think it's really cool to have musical dialects everywhere, because God's no respecter to boundaries or anything. So, like, he loves it all because it's glorifying him, you know. So, because
I don't know if you've seen this is great video by Adam Neely, who's like a music theory guy. He did a really famous video about CCM, but he also did this video essay basically about how music theory, even as we understand it in the Western world, has always been like a white male dominated place.
Yeah.
That video blew my mind, because, like, I mean, obviously growing up as a white male, like, you think, oh well, you know, what I'm learning is obviously the way. Like, there must be one universal music theory, because, you know, this is how music works. And I watched that video, and I was like, oh, wow, okay.
Yeah. Like, even if you bring that into like the UK context as well, you've got like folk music, and we do put that into Western notation, but it doesn't fit into Western notation. Like, it just doesn't make sense. Like, you need to play it by ear. We do write it down so it doesn't get lost, but also it doesn't really tell the story of the music, the folk music of, you know, our ancestors. I did Irish trad in uni, and I just remember, you know, looking at the piece of music and then hearing it and being like, but that doesn't compute.
But you can get that with like any music, really. Like, obviously, like as a music teacher, and like I'll give my students notation of the thing, but like there's so much you can't actually notate about, like, the feel of the piece. Like, obviously there's loads of things you can do dynamically and things like that, but like sometimes it's like, even the point of like, okay, this is kind of swung. It's not swung and it's not straight, but it's like almost straight, but, you know, like almost swung as well. And it's, you can't notate that. Like,
no, you just can't notate things like that. You can't notate emotion, you can't notate feeling, you can't notate like interpretation either. Like, I do often wonder if, you know, the Mozart pieces they play in orchestras is really the way he heard it.
Yeah. Was it anything like the way that he did it?
Do you think there's a way forward in terms of integrating these musical dialects into, because into kind of like contemporary worship, because like I kind of feel like it would make worship music a lot less vanilla if we were able to experience a lot of these different elements. Or do you think it's kind of so culturally rooted that it only kind of works in that context?
I suppose in ways, yeah, it is very, in some cultures it would be so culturally rooted that it would maybe be hard for people outside of that culture to understand. I mean, for example, India, they have their own scales that we do not use here. So that wouldn't naturally correlate here, for example. It might somewhere else. But I suppose with things like Apple Music and Spotify, if people are willing to record maybe like their Indian worship or their Irish trad worship or their heavy metal worship and put it on Spotify, then everyone can listen to it and see the broader picture. But I still don't know how that works on a church level either, like in a corporate setting.
Yeah, because I guess from a Western point of view, we almost kind of do expect, we kind of expect our way of doing worship music to translate everywhere else. It's like you kind of say like colonizing in that sense.
Yeah.
So I don't know. Maybe there isn't. Yes, I guess there isn't like a neat solution. But I just kind of, I think it's just a shame that we don't get to explore so much of that, especially when like we, kind of see, like Christian nationalism has taken such an intense hold over a lot of Christians in America. Like, if I don't know, music makes your whole brain light up, right? It engages all of your being. Yeah. Like, what would it look like if CCM had more of a flavor of other nations and other cultural contexts and other cultural dialects in there? Like, what would it would it perhaps broaden people's horizons outside of a nationalistic worldview? Who knows?
Yeah, I think so, because I do think in America, they, especially in that sort of like Trump evangelicalism, like they think that they're the only right people, and like everybody has a different viewpoint. Every culture does things well and does things terribly, like, for example, Northern Ireland, my cultural context, we do family and community really well, but we do integration really badly. Like, we keep the tribe separate. We don't really like come together. Although there's more coming together now, but 20 years ago there was none of that. But I think you're right. If CCM did use, like, they had like a, lots of different cultural contexts, I think we'd be broader minded people and hopefully less racist.
Like, I think it'd be such a great thing, a really important thing to go, hey, let's see how we can kind of integrate others, like kind of cultural kind of dialects in music into what we do. And it's just an interesting conversation, isn't it? Like, it is really hard because, like, you look at, I don't know, pop music, and like pop music is what it is. Like, it's the thing that's popular at the time because that's the thing that people like. And like, how did CCM get popular? Well, I mean, that's the stuff that the majority of the people buying stuff liked, I guess. Yeah. So it's like, it's such an important conversation to have, and like, be interesting to kind of like hash through ideas with people of like, okay, how could you make that work? Because obviously you can just go, hey, we've got Reckless Love, and now we're just gonna do. I mean, it'd be kind of dope actually. I was gonna like just let's just drop a reggae one beat in like the middle eight. Like, I mean, that would be really cool. but I'm kind of like talking myself into it now. I think that'd be amazing.
I think it'd be great. That's what I love that, actually, because I think that's it, isn't it? I think that's probably, I was talking about kind of like a neat solution for integrating these different cultural dialects. But maybe all we have to do is just acknowledge that we are a multicultural nation made up of multicultural congregations, because I feel like, I think it can come across as, almost appropriative or disingenuous if you're kind of just doing stuff like this for the sake of it. But if there's that member of your worship team who's from India, and it's like, hey, what if we do it like this? And you know what I mean? It's just like having more, having more voices at the table. And again, this is a theme that's come up in the podcast again and again and again and again. It's just like, wouldn't it be, it's not the whole answer to kind of deconstructing and reconstructing worship, but I think it's a part of the answer to just kind of bring out of, if not in terms of the songs themselves, but stylistically, bringing those cultural contexts up and reflecting them in the way that we play.
Yeah. Like if you look at your congregation and you look at your worship team, is your worship team reflecting your congregation? Like, do you have the same sort of ratio of people on your worship team as people in your congregation? I mean, the church I'm in now, everybody's Northern Irish, so I don't really have to worry about that at the moment. But I have been in churches here in Northern Ireland where, you would have quite a big part of the population is like Polish or Portuguese or Brazilian or from Mozambique, and they're not represented in the worship team. And I always like, why are they not? What's the reason? Is it because English isn't their first language? Well, sure, bring them along and like teach the congregation their style, their dialect, their musical expression, because I think that's important as a multicultural society, is that we're learning about other cultures and learning about our own, like reflecting off those cultures as well.
So we've hit on quite a few things, I guess, like in terms of speaking broadly about things that we could change about musical worship culture. But like, Cherith, if you could change one thing, like literally if you could snap your fingers and it would change overnight, what's the kind of one thing that you would change about worship culture?
Oh, it's like answer changed every day after you told me this was going to be a question. What's it going to be today? I just think diversity. If I could click my fingers, I think more diversity, more cultural expression, more people feeling connected to the worship because they can connect to the musical dialect of what's happening, and that's hard. It's so hard, but I think it's maybe a way that we can sort of deconstruct and decolonize what worship is.
Love it. Yeah, absolutely. And like we said, like we were just saying, I think the easiest way to do that is just to look at your worship team and just go, does this worship team represent the congregation, and does this team represent a bunch of white CCM players? The answer might be yep. And that's great. Yeah. Job done.
Yeah.
You have completed this episode of the podcast, listener. Well done.
Yeah.
Achievement unlocked.
I think also within that is, if you're like me and you're going into a totally different church setting, you're like, oh, what is the sound of this church? What is the sound that the people are, singing? What is the sound of this community? So I think for me, in my context at the moment, it'll be more, and I've been talking about this with the rector, it's like, what is the sound of this community going? What is it? Like, what do the people in this community sing? And I think it's probably going to be Irish traditional music. So I'm kind of like, how do I incorporate that into church? Like, how do I bring a boron, uilleann pipes, flute, fiddle, like whatever? Do I just say, oh no, we're not going to use piano and guitar anymore? I don't know. It's like, how do you, what is the sound of this community? What's the sound of this church? Basically, what are the people singing? What is their sound? I think is another way of looking at it.
Nice. So we talk about the big three, don't we? Talk about Bethel, Hillsong, and Elevation. And I would love to hear some of their classic songs done in a traditional Irish style.
Yeah.
I think it'd be amazing. I think it would be so fresh and so exciting to hear.
Yeah. It's I in Ireland, people kind of like Keith and Christian Getty and kind of like Wren Collective, but at the same time, we kind of feel, I don't know if everyone feels this, maybe it's just me because I play Irish trad. Sometimes I feel like they pander too much to the American audience and it's become American Irish music, which is a thing.
Okay, that's interesting.
Whereas I feel like if I went down to like a pub or somebody's house and did a trad session, it would sound completely different. Like one of their songs, I would say Wren Collective are probably like see, the thing is, Wren Collective and Keith and Christian Getty, they're from the same part of Ireland, which is the same as me, like same part I'm from. So it's, what would it sound like if I brought maybe one of their tunes to a pub? Would it sound the same? Probably not. Irish tradition. The other thing is, like, Irish traditional music had like a real resurgence over the past sort of decade. So it's like, oh, maybe the church should like jump on that bandwagon with that revival and see where it goes.
Absolutely. Yeah, because I didn't want to kind of ask the obvious question and mention Wren Collective like straight away, because but the thing is, for most people, and again, we love Wren Collective. They're really good.
Yeah, I love Wren Collective.
I love Wren Collective.
They are really, really good.
This album is amazing.
But Wren Collective are what most people will think of if you said traditional worship music and traditional Irish style worship music.
And to some extent it is, but to other extents it's really, really not. Like, it's kind of like, because so Wren Collective came out of Elim in Ireland. So I grew up in Elim in Ireland. So I saw them and heard them before their first album was out. And they were probably a lot more Irish then than they are now. And the other thing is, like, in Northern Ireland, or in Ireland, you have different dialects again when it comes to Irish music. We have 4 provinces: Ulster, Munster, Leinster and Connacht, and each province has a different style, different instrumentation. So theirs is probably more of an Ulster style. It's like fast and heavy and very percussive. But also, I think the more they stayed in Nashville, the more American Irish they sounded.
Yeah.
Even though I still love them and I still listen to them, but in my head I'm like, okay, this is American Irish music rather than like Irish.
Straight up, yeah.
But I just think Irish worship music really exists, if you get me. I think it is all that spacey rock, and I just always think what would happen because in Northern Ireland it's 14% of people would consider themselves like born again Christians, like in quotation marks, and then in the Republic of Ireland it's 1.8% would say that they're, in quotes, born again Christian. That's from the Joshua Project website, so they kind of see how many Christians are living in each country of the world. So Northern Ireland is they would say is the most reached part of Europe, and the Republic of Ireland is the least reached English-speaking country in the world.
Wow, fascinating.
So, and I have lots of friends in Dublin who are Christians, and I remember one of my friends saying to me, like we don't really connect with Elevation and Bethel and Hillsong like you guys do up north. So then I was kind of thinking, what if Irish trad was brought into the equation? Like, what if that was the style? Would more people feel like they could engage with worship? Just a question. Maybe I'll try it out. I don't know.
I think you should.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's
Absolutely.
so interesting.
Yeah. Take a video and send you it, or just next time you're in Belfast, you can come.
So that feels like a really good and positive place to, end the episode, right? Because like we've deconstructed, I feel like we've reconstructed, and we are, launching Cherith into her new career as a traditional Irish musical missionary. I think that's perfect. There we go. Fantastic. And I look forward to watching with great interest what your band looks like, and can I come and play for you, please?
Just give me 6 months.
There we go. But but seriously, Cherith, this has just been such an enlightening experience, just from a cultural point of view, from a physiological point of view. This has been absolutely fantastic.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, and look forward to having you on the podcast again sometime.
Yeah.
But, thank you so much for being
I really
here. It's been
enjoyed
absolutely brilliant. Oh, and we've enjoyed having you. It's been awesome.
And hopefully people can understand my Irish accent.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode of Deconstructing Worship. We hope that you got as much from it as we did. We would absolutely love to have you all involved in these conversations, so please find us at Instagram and YouTube, both under the handle at Deconstructing Worship. And please send in any emails with any questions or anything that you would love involved within any kind of future episodes. And our email is deconstructingworship@gmail.com. And we will talk to you next week. Bye-bye.